All right. And just for your information, I'm not going to do Zoom on Facebook because I might get in trouble with them again. And it was a real pain in the neck when they wouldn't let me post anything live for, I think, 6 weeks or something like that.
Hmm.
I had done a Mussolini quote. It was not in favor of Mussolini or in favor of fascism, but bots are bots. And they just saw the name and they said,
Hmm.
So I do YouTube Live, and then I transfer it to Facebook after that.
Oh, you do Face? Oh, can you pick it up live on YouTube? No?
You can pick it up live on YouTube, although, and I'm sure if someone stumbled across it today, they would, but I haven't quite been putting the link in there. I guess I should get that figured out next. So right now I'm just recording it and then putting it on Facebook. All right, I'm going to start. Are we ready? All right, here we go. I'm going to start with the carriage galloped around a corner and stopped. What's wrong now? A divided drove of branded cattle passed the windows, lowing, slouched by on padded hooves, whisking their tails slowly on their clotted, bony groups. Outside them and through them ran rattled sheep, bleating their fear. Immigrants, Mr. Powers said. Hurrah! The drover's voice cried, his switch sounding on their flanks. Hurrah! Out of that! Thursday, of course, and Thursday is killing day. Springers. Cuff sold them for about 27 quid each. For Liverpool, probably. Roast beef for old England. They buy up all the juicy ones. And then the fifth quarter lost. All that raw stuff, hide, hair, horns, comes to a big thing in a year. Dead meat trade. Byproducts of the slaughterhouses for canneries, soap, margarine. Wonder if that Dodge works now, getting dicky meat off the train at Clonsilla. The carriage moved on through the drove. Next, please.
I can't make out why the corporation doesn't run a tram line from the park gate to the quays, Mr. Bloom said. All those animals could be taken in trucks down to the boats. Instead of blocking up the thoroughfare, Martin Cunningham said. Quite right, they ought to. Yes, Mr. Bloom said. And another thing I often thought is to have municipal funeral trams like they have in Milan, run the line out to the cemetery gates and have special trams, hearse, carriage and all. Don't you see what I mean? Oh, that'd be damned for a story, Mr. Dedalus said. Pullman car and saloon dining room. A poor lookout for Corny, Mr. Power added. Why? Mr. Bloom asked, turning to Mr. Dedalus. Wouldn't it be more decent than galloping two abreast? Well, there's something in that, Mr. Dedalus granted. And Martin Cunningham said we wouldn't have scenes like that when the hearse capsized round Dunphy's and upset the coffin onto the road. That was terrible, Mr. Power's shocked face said. And the corpse fell about the road. Terrible. First round Dunphy's, Mr. Dedalus said, nodding. Gordon Bennett Cup. Praises be to God, Martin Cunningham said piously. Bum, upset. A coffin bumped out onto the road, burst open. Patty Dignam shot out and rolling over stiff in the dust in a brown habit too large for him. Red face, gray now, mouth fallen open, asking, what's up now? Quite right to close it. Looks horrid open. Then the inside decomposed quickly. Much better to close up all the orifices. Yes, also with wax. The sphincter loose. Seal up all. Dunphy's, Mr. Power announced as the carriage turned right. Dunphy's corner. Morning coaches drawn up, drowning their grief. A pause by the wayside. Tip-top position for a pub. Expect we'll pull up there on the way back to drink his health. Pass round the consolation. Elixir of life. But suppose now it did happen. Would he bleed if a nail, say, cut him in the knocking about? He would, and he wouldn't, I suppose. Depends on where. The circulation stops. Still, some might ooze out of an artery. It would be better to bury them in red, a dark red. In silence, they drove along Phipsborough Road. An empty hearse trotted by, coming from the cemetery. Looks relieved. Next.
You got to turn on your microphone.
Sorry, it went off again. Crossguns Bridge, the Royal Canal. Water rushed roaring through the sluices. A man stood on his dropping barge between clamps of turf. On the towpath, by the lock of a slack-tethered horse, aboard of the Bugaboo. Their eyes watched him. On the slow, weedy waterway, he had floated on his raft coastward over Ireland, drawn by a haulage rope past beds of reeds, over slime, mud-choked bottles, carrion dogs. Athlone, Mullingar, Moy Valley. I could make a walking tour to see Millie by the canal, or cycle down. Hire some old crock, safety. Wren had one the other day at the auction, but a lady's. Developing waterways, James McCann's hobby to row me over the ferry. Cheaper transit, by easy stages. Houseboats, camping out, also hearses. To heaven by water. Perhaps I will, without writing, come as a surprise. Leakslip, Clonsilla, dropping down lock by lock to Dublin, with turf from the Midland bogs. Salute. He lifted his brown straw hat, saluting Paddy Dignam. They drove on past Brian Boru House, near it now. I wonder how is our friend Fogarty getting on, Mr. Power said. Better ask Tom Kiernan, Mr. Dedalus said. How's that? Martin Cunningham said. Left him weeping, I suppose, though lost to sight, Mr. Dedalus said. To memory, dear. The carriage steered left for Finglas Road. The Stonecutters' Yard on the right. Last lap. Crowded on the spit of land, silent shapes appeared, white, sorrowful, holding out calm hands, knelt in grief, pointing fragments of shapes hewn in white silence, appealing, the best obtainable. Thomas H. Dennehy, monumental builder and sculptor. Next, please.
Past. On the curbstone before Jimmy Geary, the sexton's an old tramp sat, grumbling, emptying the dirt and stones out of his huge dust-brown yawning boot. After life's journey. Gloomy gardens then went by one, gloomy houses. Mr. Power pointed. That is where Childs was murdered, he said, the last house. So it is, Mr. Dedalus said, a gruesome case. Seymour Bush got him off, murdered his brother, or so they said. The Crown had no evidence, Mr. Power said. Only circumstantial, Martin Cunningham said. That's the maxim of the law. Better for 99 guilty to escape than for one innocent person to be wrongfully condemned. They looked. Murderer's ground. It passed darkly, shuttered, tenantless, unweeded garden. Whole place gone to hell, wrongfully condemned. Murder. The murderer's image in the eye of the murdered. They love reading about it. Man's head found in garden. Her clothing consisted of how she met her death, recent outrage, the weapon used. Murder is still at large. Clues, a shoelace, the body to be exhumed. Murder will out. Next, please.
Cramped in this carriage. She mightn't like me to come that way without letting her know. Must be careful about women. Catch them once with their pats down. Never forgive you after. 15. The high railings of Prospect rippled past their gaze. Dark poplars, rare white forms more frequent, white shapes thronged amid the trees, white forms and fragments streaming mutely. sustaining vain gestures in the air. The felly harshed against the curbstone, stopped. Martin Cunningham put out his arm, and wrenching back the handle, shoved the door open with his knee. He stepped out. Mr. Power and Mr. Dedalus followed. Change that soap now. Mr. Bloom's hand unbuttoned his hip pocket swiftly and transferred the paper stuck soap to his inner handkerchief pocket. He stepped out of the carriage, replacing the newspaper. His other hand held still. Paltry funeral. Coach and 3 carriages. It's all the same. Pallbearers, gold reins, requiem mass, firing a volley, pomp of death. Behind the hind carriage, a hawker stood with his barrow full of cakes and fruit. Simnel cakes those are, stuck together, cakes for the dead. Dog biscuits. Who ate them? Mourners coming out. He followed his companions. Mr. Kernan and Ned Lambert followed, Hines walking after them. Corny Kelleher stood by the open hearse and took out 2 wreaths. He handed one to the boy. Where's that child's funeral disappeared to? Next.
A team of horses passed from Finglass with roiling, plodding tread, dragging through the funeral silence a creaking wagon on which lay a granite block. The wagoner, marching at their head, saluted. Coffin now. Got here before us, dead as he is. Horse looking round as it with its plume skioways. Dull eye, collar tight on his neck, pressing on a blood vessel or something. Do they know what they cart out here every day? Must be 20 or 30 funerals every day. Then Mount Jerome for the Protestants. Funerals all over the world, everywhere, every minute, shoveling them under by carload double quick. Thousands every hour, too many in the world. Mourners came out through the gates, woman and a girl, lean-jawed harpy, hard woman at a bargain, her bonnet awry. Girl's face stained with dirt and tears, holding the woman's arm, looking up at her for a sign to cry. Fish's face, bloodless and livid. The mutes shouldered the coffin and bore it in through the gates. So much dead weight. Felt heavier myself stepping out of that bath. First the stiff, then the friends of the stiff. Corny Kelleher and the boy followed with their wreaths. Who is that beside them? Ah, the brother-in-law. All walked after. Martin Cunningham whispered, I was in mortal agony with you talking of suicide before Bloom. What? Mr. Power whispered. How so? His father poisoned himself, Martin Cunningham whispered. Had the Queen's Hotel in Ennis. You heard him say that he was going to declare anniversary. Oh God, Mr. Power whispered. First I heard of it. Poisoned himself? Next, please.
He glanced behind him to where a face with dark, thinking eyes followed towards the Cardinal's mausoleum. Speaking. Was he insured? Mr. Bloom asked. I believe so, Mr. Kernan answered, but the policy was heavily mortgaged. Martin is trying to get the youngster into Martagne. How many children did he leave? 5. Ned Lambert says he'll try to get one of the girls into Todd's. Sad case, Mr. Bloom said gently. 5 young children. A great blow to the poor wife, Mr. Kernan added. Indeed, yes, Mr. Bloom agreed. He has the laugh at him now. He looked down at the boots he had blackened and polished. She had outlived him, lost her husband, more dead for her than for me. One must outlive the other, wise men say. There are more women than men in the world. Condole with her, your terrible loss. I hope you'll soon follow him. For Hindu widows only. She would marry another. No. Yet who knows after? Widowhood, not the thing since the old queen died. Drawn on a gun carriage, Victoria and Albert. Frogmore Memorial morning. But in the end, she put a few violets in her bonnet, baying in her heart of hearts. All for a shadow. Consort, not even a king. Her son was the substance, something new to hope for. Not like the past she wanted back, waiting. It never comes. One must go first, alone, under the ground, and lie no more in her warm bed. How are you, Simon? Neil Lambert said softly, clasping hands. Haven't seen you for a month of Sundays. Never better. Now we're all in Cork's own town. I was down there for the Cork Park races on Easter Monday, Ned Lambert said. Same old 6 and 8pence. Stopped with Dick Tivy. And how is Dick, the solid man? Nothing between himself and heaven, Ned Lambert answered. By the holy Paul, Mr. Daedalus said at supper. Dick Tivy bald? Martin is going to get up a whip for the youngsters, Ned Lambert said, pointing ahead. A few bob a skull, just to keep them going until the insurance is cleared up. Next.
Yes, yes, Mr. Daedalus said dubiously. Is that the oldest boy in front? Yes, Ned Lambert said, with the wife's brother. John Henry Menton is behind. He put down his name for a quid. I'll engage he did, Mr. Daedalus said. I'm often told poor Paddy he ought to mind that job. John Henry is not the worst in the world. How did he lose it? Ned Lambert asked. Liquor? What? Ah, many a good man's fault, Mr. Daedalus said with a sigh. They halted about the door of the mortuary chapel. Mr. Bloom stood behind the boy with the wreath, looking down at his sleek combed hair and at the slender furrowed neck inside his brand new collar. Poor boy. Was he there when his father? Both unconscious. Lighten up at the last moment and recognize for the last time all he might have done. I owe 3 shillings to O'Grady. Would he understand? The mutes bore the coffin into the chapel. Which end is its head? After a moment, he followed the others in, blinking in the screened light. The coffin lay in its bier before the chancel, 4 tall yellow candles at its corners. Always in front of us, Corny Kelleher, laying a wreath at each fore corner, beckoned to the boy to kneel. The mourners knelt there and there, here and there, in praying desk. Mr. Bloom stood near the fount, and when all had knelt, dropped carefully on his folded newspaper from his pocket and knelt his right knee upon it. He fitted his black hat gently on his left knee and holding its brim, bent over piously. Next, please.
A server, bearing a brass bucket with something in it, came out through a high door. The white-smocked priest came after him, tidying his stole with one hand, balancing with the other a little book against his toad's belly. Who'll read the book? I, said the rook. They halted by the bier, and the priest began to read out of his book with a fluent croak. Father Coffey. I knew his name was like a coffin. Domine nomine. Bully about the muzzle he looks. Bosses the show. Muscular Christian. Woe betide anyone that looks crooked at him. Priest. Thou art Peter. Burst sideways like a sheep in clover, Daedalus says he will. With a belly on him like a poisoned pup. Most amusing expressions that man finds. Burst sideways. Non intres in judicium cum servo tuo, Domine. Makes him feel more important to be prayed over in Latin. Requiem Mass, crepe weepers, black-edged notepaper. Your name on the altar list. Chilly place this. Want to feed well, sitting in there all the morning in the gloom, kicking his heels, waiting for the next please. Eyes of a toad, too. What swells him up that way? Molly gets swelled after cabbage. Air of the place, maybe. Looks full of bad gas. Must be an infernal lot of bad gas around the place. Butchers, for instance, they get like raw beefsteaks. Who was telling me? Mervyn Brown, down in the vaults of St. Urbo's lovely old organ, 150 they have to bore a hole in the coffin. Lovely old organ, 150. They have to bore a hole in the coffin sometimes to let out the bad gas and burn it. Out it rushes, blue, one whiff of that, and you're a goner. My kneecap is hurting me. Oh, that's better. The priest took a stick with a knob at the end of it out of the boy's bucket and shook it over the coffin. Then he walked to the other end and shook it again. Then he came back and put it back in the bucket. As you were before you rested. It's all written down. He has to do it. Et ne nos inducas in tentationem. Next.
The server piped the answers in the treble. I often thought it would be better to have boy servants, up to 15 or so. After that, of course. Holy water that was, I expect, shaking sleep out of it. He must be fed up with that job, shaking that thing over all the corpses they trot up. What harm if he could see what he was shaking it over? Every mortal day a fresh batch, middle-aged men, old women, children, women dead in childbirth, men with beards, bald-headed businessmen, consumptive girls with little sparrows' breasts. All the year round he prayed the same thing over them all and shook water on top of them. Sleep. On Dignam now. In paradisum. Said he was going to paradise, or is in paradise. Says that over everybody. Tiresome kind of a job, but he has to say something. The priest closed his book and went off, followed by the server. Corny Keller opened the side doors and the grave diggers came in, hoisted the coffin again, carried it out and shoved it on their cart. Corny Keller gave one wreath to the boy and one to the brother-in-law. All followed them out the side doors in the mild grey air. Mr. Bloom came last, folding his paper again into his pocket. He gazed gravely at the ground till the coffin cart wheeled off to the left. The metal wheels ground the gravel with a sharp, grating cry, and the pack of blunt boots followed the barrow along a lane of sepulchres. Next, please.
The ree, the ra, the ree, the ra, the roo. Lord, I mustn't lilt here. The O'Connell Circle, Mr. Dedalus said about him. Mr. Power's soft eyes went up to the apex of the lofty cone. He's at rest, he said, in the middle of his people, old Dan O. But his heart is buried in Rome. How many broken hearts are buried here? Simon? Her grave is over there, Jack, Mr. Dedalus said. I'll soon be stretched beside her. Let him take me whenever he likes. Breaking down, he began to weep to himself quietly, stumbling a little in his walk. Mr. Power took his arm. She's better where she is, he said kindly. I suppose so, Mr. Dedalus said with a weak gasp. I suppose she is in heaven, if there is a heaven. Corny Kelleher stepped aside from his rank and allowed the mourners to plod by. Sad occasions, Mr. Kiernan began politely. Mr. Bloom closed his eyes and sadly twice bowed his head. The others are putting on their hats, Mr. Kiernan said. I suppose we can do so too. We are the last. This cemetery is a treacherous place. They covered their heads. The reverend gentleman read the service too quickly, don't you think? Mr. Kiernan said with reproof. Mr. Bloom nodded gravely, looking in the quick, bloodshot eyes, secret searching eyes. Mason, I think. Not sure. Beside him again. We are the last. In the same boat. Hope he'll say something else. Next, please.
Mr. Kiernan added, the service of the Irish Church used in Mount Jerome is simpler, more impressive, I must say. Mr. Bloom gave prudent assent. The language, of course, was another thing. Mr. Kiernan said with solemnity, I am the resurrection and the life. That touches a man's innermost heart. It does, says Bloom. Your heart, perhaps, But what price the fellow in the 6x2 was exposed to the daisies? No touching that. Seat of the affections. Broken heart. A pump, after all. Pumping thousands of gallons of blood every day. One fine day it gets bunged up, and there you are. Lots of them lying around here. Lungs, hearts, livers. Old rusty pumps. Damn the thing else. The resurrection and the life. Once you're dead, you're dead. The last day idea. Knocking them all up out of their graves. Come forth, Lazarus. And he came fifth and lost the job. Get up, last day. Then every fellow mousing around for his liver and his lights and the rest of his traps. Fine damn all of himself that morning. Pennyweight of powder in a skull. 12 grams, 1 pennyweight. Troy measure. Corny Kelleher fell into step at their side. Everything went off A1, he said. What? He looked at them from his drolling eye, policeman's shoulders, with your lura-lum. As it should be, Mr. Kernan said. What? Eh? Corny Kelleher said. Mr. Kernan reassured him. Who is that chap behind Tom Kernan? John Henry Menton asked. I know his face. Ned Lambert glanced back. Bloom, he said. Marion Tweeder, that is, the soprano. She's his wife. Next, please.
Oh, to be sure, John Henry Minton said. I haven't seen her for some time. She was a fine-looking woman. I danced with her. 15, 17 golden years ago at Matt Dillon's in Roundtown, and a good armful she was. He looked behind through the others. What is he? He asked. What does he do? Wasn't he in the stationery line? I fell foul of him one evening, I remember, at Bowles. Ned Lambert smiled. Yes, he was, he said, in Wisdom Healy's, a traveler for blotting paper. In God's name, John Henry Menton said, what did she marry a coon like that for? She had plenty of game in her then. Still has, Ned Lambert said. He does some canvassing for ads. John Henry Menton's large eyes stared ahead. The barrow turned into a side lane. A portly man, ambushed among the grasses, raised his hat in homage. The gravediggers touched their caps. John O'Connell, Mr. Power said, please. He never forgets a friend. Mr. O'Connell shook all their hands in silence. Mr. Dedalus said, I am come to pay you another visit. My dear Simon, the caretaker answered in a low voice, I don't want your custom at all. Saluting Ned Lambert and John Henry Menton, he walked on at Martin Cunningham's side, puzzling 2 long keys at his back. Did you hear that one, he asked them, about Mulcahy from the Coombe? I did not, Martin Cunningham said. They bent their silk hats in concert, and Hines inclined his ear. The caretaker hung his thumbs in loops of his gold watch chain and spoke in a discreet tone to their vacant smiles. They tell the story, he said, that 2 drunks came out here one foggy evening to look for the grave of a friend of theirs. They asked for Mulcahy from Coombe and were told where he was buried. After traipsing about in the fog, they found the grave, sure enough. One of the drunks spelt out the name Terence McCulley. The other drunk was blinking up at the statue of our Savior the widow had got put up. Next, please.
The caretaker blinked up at one of the sepulchres they passed. He resumed. And after blinking up at the sacred figure, not a bloody bit like the man, says he. That's not Mulcahy, says he. Whoever done it. Rewarded by smiles, he fell back and spoke with Corny Kelleher, accepting the dockets given him, turning them over and scanning them as he walked. That's all done with a purpose, Martin Cunningham explained to Hines. I know, Hines said, I know that. To cheer a fellow up, Martin Cunningham said. It's pure good-headedness. Damn the thing else. Mr. Bloom admired the caretaker's prosperous bulk. All want to be on good terms with him. Decent fellow, John O'Connell, real good sort. Keys. Like Keys's ad. No fear of anyone getting out. No pass-out checks. Habeas corpus. I must see about that ad after the funeral. Did I write Ballsbridge on the envelope I took to cover when she disturbed me writing to Martha? Hope it's not chucked in the dead letter office. Be the better of a shave. Gray sprouting beard, that's the first sign when the hairs come out gray. And temper getting cross. Silver threads among the gray. Fancy being his wife. Wonder he had the gumption to propose to any girl. Come out and live in the graveyard. Dangle that before her. It might thrill her first. Courting death. Shades of night hovering here, with all the dead stretched about. The shadows of the tombs when churchyards yawned. And Daniel O'Connor must be a descendant, I suppose. Who was this used to say he was a queer, breedy man? Great Catholic all the same, like a big giant in the dark. Will-o'-the-wisp. Yes, of graves. One to keep her mind off it to conceive it all. Women especially are so touchy. Tell her a ghost story in bed to make her sleep. Have you ever seen a ghost? Well, I have. It was a pitch dark night. The clock was on the stroke of 12. Still, they'd kiss all right if properly keyed up. Whores in Turkish graveyards. Learn anything if taken young. You might pick up a young widow here. Men like that. Love among the tombstones. Romeo. Spice of pleasure. In the midst of death, we are in life. Both ends meet. Tantalizing for the poor dead. Smell of grilled beefsteaks to the starving, gnawing their vitals. Despite desire to grig people, Molly wanting to do it at the window. 8 children he has anyway. Next.
He has seen a fair share go under in his time, lying around in field after field, holy fields. More room if they buried them standing. Sitting or kneeling, you couldn't. Standing? His head might come up someday above the ground and the land slip with his hand pointing. All honeycombed the ground must be, oblong cells. And very neat he keeps it too. Trim grass and edgings. His garden, Major Gamble calls Mount Jerome. Well, so it is. Ought to be flowers of sleep. Chinese cemeteries with giant poppies growing produce. The best opium, Matiansky told me. The botanic gardens are just over there. It's the blood sinking in the earth gives new life. Same idea those Jews, they said, killed the Christian boy. Every man his price. Well-preserved fat corpse. Gentleman, epicure, and valuable for fruit garden. A bargain. By carcass of William Wilkinson, auditor and accountant, lately deceased, 3 pounds, 13 6, with thanks. I dare say the soil would be quite fat with corpse manure, bones, flesh, nails, charnel houses, dreadful. Turning green and pink, decomposing, rot quickly in damp earth. The lean old ones tougher. And a kind of tallowy kind of cheese. Then began to get black treacle oozing out of it, and then dried up death moss. Of course, the cells or whatever they are go on living, changing about, live forever practically. Nothing to feed on themselves. Next, please.
But they must breed a devil of a lot of maggots. Soil must be simply swirling with them. Your head, it simply swirls, so pretty little seaside girls. He looks cheerful enough over it. Gives him a sense of power, seeing all the others go under first. Wonder how he looks at life. Cracking his jokes, too. Warms the cockles of his heart. The one about the bulletin. Spurgeon went to heaven 4 a.m. this morning. 11 p.m., closing time. Not arrived yet, Peter. The dead themselves, the men, anyhow, would like to hear an old joke. Or the women, to know what's in fashion. A juicy pear or ladies' punch, hot, strong, and sweet. Keep out the damp. You must laugh sometimes, so better do it that way. Grave diggers in Hamlet shows the profound knowledge of the human heart. Daren't joke about the dead for 2 years at least. De mortuis nil nisi prius. Go out of mourning first. Hard to imagine his funeral. Seems a sort of a joke. Read your own obituary notice. They say you live longer. Gives you second wind. New lease of life. How many have you for tomorrow? The caretaker asked. 2, Corny Kelleher said. 10:30 and 11. The caretaker put the papers in his pocket. The barrow had ceased to trundle. The mourners split and moved to each side of the hole, stepping with care around the graves. The grave diggers bore the coffin and set its nose on the brink, looping the bands round it, burying him. We come to bury Caesar, his Ides of March or June. He doesn't know who is here nor care. Now, who is that lanky-looking galoot over there in the Macintosh? Now, who is he, I'd like to know? Now, I'd give a trifle to know who he is. Always someone turns up you never dreamt of. A fellow could live on his lonesome all his life. Yes, he could. Still, he'd have to get someone to sod him after he died, though. Though he could dig his own grave. We all do. Only man buries. No, ants, too. First thing strikes anybody. Bury the dead. Say Robinson Crusoe is true to life. Well, then, Friday buried him. Every Friday buries a Thursday if you come to look at it. Oh, poor Robinson Crusoe, how could you possibly do so? Next.
Poor Dignam, his last lie on the earth in his box. When you think of them, all it does seem a waste of wood, all gnawed through. They could invent a handsome bier with a kind of panel sliding, let it down that way. Aye, but they might object to be buried out of another fellow's. They're so particular. Lay me in my native earth, bit of clay from the Holy Land. Only a mother and dead-born child ever buried in the one coffin. I see what it means, I see. To protect him as long as possible, even in the earth. The Irishman's house is his coffin. Embalming and catacombs, mummies, the same idea. Mr. Bloom stood far back, his hat in his hand, counting the bared heads. 12. I'm 13. No, the chap in the Macintosh is 13. Death's number. Where the deuce did he pop out of? He wasn't in the chapel, that I'll swear. Silly superstition, that about 13. Nice soft tweed Ned Lambert has in that suit, tinge of purple. I had one like that when we lived in Lombard Street West. Dressy fellow he was once. Used to change 3 suits in a day. Must get that grey suit of mine turned up at Messiah's. Hello, it's died. His wife, I forgot he's not married, or his landlady ought to have picked out those threads for him. The coffin dived out of sight, eased down by the men straddled on the grave trestles. They struggled up and out and all uncovered. 20. Pause. As if we were all suddenly somebody else. Far away a donkey brayed. Rain. No such ass. Never see a dead one, they say. Shame of death. They hide. Also, poor Papa went away. Next, please.
Gentle, sweet air blew round the bared heads in a whisper, whisper. The boy by the grave head held his wreath with both hands, staring quietly in the black open space. Mr. Bloom moved behind the portly, kindly caretaker, well-cut frock coat, weighing them up perhaps to see which will go next. Well, it's a long rest. Feel no more. It's the moment you feel. Must be damned unpleasant. Can't believe it at first. Mistake must be. Someone else. Try the house opposite. Wait. I want to. I haven't yet. Then darkened death chamber. Light they want. Whispering around you. Would you like to see a priest? Then rambling and wandering, delirium, all you hid all your life, the death struggle. His sleep is not natural, presses lower eyelid. Watching, is his nose pointed? Is his jaw sinking? Are the soles of his feet yellow? Pull the pillow away and finish it off on the floor since he's doomed. Devil in that picture of sinner's death showing him a woman, dying to embrace her in his shirt. Last act of Lucia, shall I never more behold thee? Bam, expires. Gone at last. People talk about you a bit. Forget you. Don't forget to pray for him. Remember him in your prayers. Even Parnell. Ivy Day dying out. Then they follow, dropping into a hole, one after the other. Next, please.
We are praying now for the repose of his soul. Hoping you're well and not in hell. Nice change of air. Out of the frying pan of life into the fire of purgatory. Does he ever think of the hole waiting for himself? They say you do when you shiver in the sun, someone walking over it. Call boys warning, near you. Mine over there towards Finglas, the plot I bought. Mama, poor Mama, and little Rudy. The gravediggers took up their spades and flung heavy clods of clay in on the coffin. Mr. Bloom turned his face away. And if he were alive all the time, whee, by jingo, that would be awful. No, he's dead, of course. Of course he's dead. Monday he died. They ought to have some law to pierce the heart and make sure. Or an electric clock, or a telephone in the coffin, or some kind of canvas air hole. Flag of distress, 3 days. Rather long to keep them in the summer. Just as well to get shut of them as soon as you're sure. But there's no. The clay fell softer, begin to be forgotten, out of sight, out of mind. The caretaker moved away a few paces and put on his hat. Had enough of it. The mourners took heart of grace, one by one, covering themselves without show. Mr. Bloom put on his hat and saw the portly figure make its way deftly through the maze of graves. Quietly, sure of his ground, he traversed the dismal fields. Hines jotting down something in his notebook. Ah, the names. But he knows them all. No, coming to me. I'm just taking the names, Hines said below his breath. What is your Christian name? I'm not sure. L, Mr. Bloom said. Leopold. And you might put down McCoy's name too. He asked me to. Charlie, Hines said, writing. I know. He was on the Freeman once. Next.
So he was before he got the job in the morgue under Louis Byrne. Good idea, post-mortem for doctors. Find out what they imagine they know. He died of a Tuesday. Got the run. Levanted with the cash of a few ads. Charlie, you're my darling. That was why he asked me to. Oh, well, does no harm. I saw to that, McCoy. Thanks, old chap. Much obliged. Leave him under an obligation. Costs nothing. And tell us, Hines said, do you know that fellow in the fellow over there in the Hines? He looked around. McIntosh. Yes, I saw him, Bloom said. Where is he now? McIntosh, Hines said, scribbling. I don't know who he is. Is that his name? He moved away, looking about him. No, Mr. Bloom began, turning and stopping. I say, Hines, didn't hear. Where has he disappeared to? Not a sign. Well, of all the, has anybody seen? Kell, become invisible? Good Lord, what became of him? A seventh grave digger came beside Mr. Bloom to take up an idle spade. Oh, excuse me. He stepped aside nimbly. Clay, brown, damp, began to be seen in the hole. It rose, nearly over. A mound of damp clods rose, and the grave diggers rested their spades. All uncovered again for a few instants. The boy propped his wreath against a corner, the brother-in-law his on a lump. The grave diggers put on their caps and carried their earthy spades towards the barrow, then knocked the blades lightly on the turf, clean. One bent to pluck from the haft a long tuft of grass. One, leaving his mates, walked slowly on with shouldered weapon, its blade blue glancing. Silently at the grave head, another coiled the coffin band, his navel cord. The brother-in-law, turning away, placed something in his free hand. Thanks in silence. Sorry, sir. Trouble. Headshake. I know that. For yourself, just. Next, please.
The mourners moved away without aim by devious paths, staying at whiles to read a name on a tomb. Let us go round by the chief's grave, Hines said. We have time. Let us, Mr. Power said. They turned to the right, following their slow thoughts. With awe, Mr. Power's blank voice spoke. Some say he is not in that grave at all, that the coffin was filled with stones, that one day he will come again. Hines shook his head. Parnell will never come again, he said. He's there, all that was mortal of him. Peace to his ashes. Mr. Bloom walked unheeded along his grove by saddened angels, crosses, broken pillars, family vaults, stone hopes praying with upcast eyes, old Ireland's hearts and hands. More sensible to spend the money on some charity for the living, pray for the repose of the soul of. Does anybody really? Plant him and have done with him, like down a coal chute. Then lump them together to save time. All Souls Day, 27th. I'll be at his grave. 10 shillings for the gardener. He keeps it free of weeds. Old man himself. Bent down double with his shears clipping near death's door. Who passed away, who departed this life, as if they did it of their own accord. Got the shove, all of them. Who kicked the bucket? More interestingly, they told you what they were. So-and-so, wheelwright. I traveled to Cork Lino. I paid 5 shillings in the pound. Or a woman's with a saucepan. I cooked good Irish stew. Eulogy in a country churchyard. It ought to be that poem of whose it was, Wordsworth or Thomas Campbell, entered into rest, the Protestants put it. Old Dr. Murds, the great physician, called him home. Well, it's God's acre for them. Nice country residence, newly plastered and painted. Ideal spot to have a quiet smoke and read the church times. Marriage ads they never try to beautify. Rusty wreaths hung on knobs, garlands of bronze foil. Better value that for the money. Still the flowers are more poetical. The other gets rather tiresome, never withering, expresses nothing. Immortel. Next.
Okay, we're about 2 pages from the end of Hades. And so, let's read like a quarter of a page or so to finish up today. A bird sat tamely perched on a poplar branch, like stuffed, like the wedding present Alderman Hooper gave us. Ooh, not a budge at him. Knows there's no catapults to let fly at him. Dead animal, even sadder. Silly Millie burying the little dead bird in the kitchen matchbox. A daisy chain and bits of broken chainies on the grave. The Sacred Heart, that is, showing it. Heart on his sleeve. Ought to be sideways. And red it should be, painted like a real heart. Ireland was dedicated to it. Or whatever that. Seems anything but pleased. Why this infliction? Would birds come then and peck like the boy with the basket of fruit? But he said no, because they ought to have been afraid of the boy. Apollo, that was. Next.
How many? All these here once walked round Dublin, faithful departed. As you are now, so once we were. Besides, how could you remember everybody? Eyes, walk, voice. Well, the voice, yes, gramophone. Have a gramophone in every grave or keep it in the house. After dinner on a Sunday, put on poor old great-grandfather. Hello, hello, hello. I'm awfully glad to see her again. Hello, hello. I'm awful cops. Remind you of the voice like the photograph reminds you of the face. Otherwise, you couldn't remember the face after 15 years, say. For instance, who? For instance, some fellow that died when I was in Wisdom Healy's. A rattle of pebbles. Wait, stop. You look down intently into a stone crypt. Some animal. Wait, there he goes. An obese gray rat toddled along the side of the crypt, moving the pebbles. An old stager. Great-grandfather. He knows the ropes. The gray, alive, crushed itself in under the plinth, wriggled itself in under it. Good hiding place for treasure. Next.
Who lives there? Are laid the remains of Robert Emery. Robert Emmet was buried here by torchlight, wasn't he? Making his rounds. Tail gone now. One of those chaps would make short work of a fellow, pick the bones clean no matter who it was. Ordinary meat for them. A corpse is meat gone bad. Well, and what's cheese? Corpse of milk. I read in that Voyages of China that the Chinese say a white man smells like a corpse. Cremation better. Priests dead against it. Deviling for the other firm. Wholesale burners and Dutch oven dealers. Time of the plague. Next, please.
Quicklime fever pits treat them, lethal chamber, ashes to ashes, or bury at sea. Where is that Parsi tower of silence, eaten by birds? Earth, fire, water. Drowning, they say, is the pleasantest. See your whole life in a flash. But being brought back to life, no. Can't bury in the air, however. Out of a flying machine. Wonder does the news go about whenever a fresh one is let down? Underground communication. We learned that from them. Wouldn't be surprised. Regular square feed for them. Flies come before he's well dead. Got wind of Dignam. They wouldn't care about the smell of it. Salt white, crumbling mush of corpse. Smell, taste like raw white turnips. Next.
The gates glimmered in front, still open. Back to the world again. Enough of this place. Brings you a bit nearer every time. Last year I was there for Mrs. Sinico's funeral. Poor Papa too. The love that kills. And even scraping up the earth at night with the lantern light. That case I read of to get at fresh buried females. Or even putrefied with running grave sores. Give you the creeps after a bit. I will appear to you after death. You will see my ghost after death. My ghost will haunt you after death. There is another world after death, named hell. I do not like that other world, she wrote. No more do I. Plenty to see and hear and feel yet. Feel live, warm beings near you. Let them sleep in their maggoty beds. They're not going to get me this innings. Warm beds, warm, full-blooded life. Martin Cunningham emerged from a side path, talking gravely. Next.
Solicitor, I think. I know his face. Menton, John Henry, Solicitor Commissioner for Oaths and Affidavits. Dignam used to be in his office. Matt Dillon's long ago. Jolly Matt, convivial evenings, cold, foul cigars, the Tantalus glasses, Heart of gold, really. Yes, Menton got his rag out that evening on the boiling green because I sailed inside him. Through a fluke of mine, the bias, why he took such a rooted dislike to me, hate at first sight. Molly and Chloe Dillon linked under the lilac tree laughing. Fellow always like that, mortified if women are by. Got a ding in the side of his hat. Courage, probably. Next, please.
Excuse me, sir, Mr. Bloom said beside them. They stopped. Your hat is a little crushed, Mr. Bloom said, pointing. John Henry Menton stared at him for an instant without moving. There, Martin Cunningham helped, pointing also. John Henry Menton took off his hat, bulged out the ding, and smoothed the nap with care on his coat sleeve. He clapped the hat on his head again. It's all right now, Martin Cunningham said. John Henry Menton jerked his head down in acknowledgement. Thank you, he said shortly. They walked on towards the gates. Mr. Bloom, chapfallen, drew behind a few paces so as not to overhear. Martin laying down the law. Martin could wind a sappy head like that round his little finger without his seeing it. Oyster eyes. Never mind. He's sorry after, perhaps, when it dawns on him. Get the pullover in that way. Thank you. How grand we are this morning.
Yeah.
All right. You all are great. And we didn't even try to plan a Bloomsday celebration.
No.
And I think we managed it anyway. Oh my goodness.
Hmm.
It's great the way he gets them in. You know, O'Connell and Parnell, and they're all dead. They're all in the graveyard, and it's like everyone's going to be forgotten. It's sort of sad at the same time. Like, remember me in your prayers, and then over time they're not remembered and they're gobbled up.
Yes, it is true, and that it is a hard thing. But I actually really like reading this section of Ulysses, and I really like Bloom's comments. I mean, he's just so commonsensical and down to earth in many ways.
Yeah, and he's got the measure of some of them.
Of the characters in here, you mean?
Yeah.
Fellow like that, mortified if women are by.
Yeah.
Do you think he's talking about, Joyce is talking about himself as well? Would he have been mortified and embarrassed if something inadvertent happened when if he was seen to lose when a woman was around?
Well, maybe when he was young. I can't imagine the mature Joyce being that way. You know.
But he did notice it I mean, it does, it is a thing. I mean, it does, people, some men are that way.
Mhm.
So he observed it if he didn't feel it himself. It's amusing the way Bloom makes so many mistakes when he's when he's remembering things. I mean, just the odd phrase he gets wrong. Some of them, I mean, obviously intentionally, but in many cases, he's trying to remember, or he's thinking to something, but he doesn't quite get it, which is also very human.
So for example, Bill,
For example, I'd have to go through more carefully because I don't think I marked any. I didn't.
Well, one of them is the eulogy in a churchyard.
Right.
Isn't it elegy?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
mhm. One of the sections here that really, well, there's two sections here that really struck me. There's so much richness in this whole thing. But this back here, when he goes, love among the tombstones, Romeo, spice of pleasure in the midst of death, we are in life, both ends meet. I mean, kind of a very Finnegan's Wake sort of thing. And yeah, the other part that I really love, I mean, yes, Bloom does make mistakes and all that, but he also says some very profound things in here. And then right at the time when he says, well, enough of that, we got to, it's time to get out of this place. And he's walking, towards the outside gates. And what's the first freaking thing he does? He becomes really petty and has the hat interaction with John Henry Menton.
Oh, I don't see it as being petty at all.
Oh, really? Okay, I see it as being incredibly petty.
On Bloom's part.
On Bloom's part. And
on
John Henry Menton's part too. Well,
no, I've always thought of it as being Bloom really just being a considerate person. I mean, he's just trying to be helpful, like he always is. He's pointing out, well, you got a ding in your hat there. You should, you might want to look at that.
Yeah, but the last right before the end, oyster eyes, never mind. Be sorry after perhaps when it dawns on him. Get the pullover on him that way.
Mm.
Yeah, but maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but I think he actually remembered the earlier thing. What was it, Parnell or O'Connell thing where there was another. No, I'm getting confused at this point. But he had an earlier interaction with John Henry Menton at a different time, and it seems like.
Yeah, but I don't think Bloom holds any. Bloom understands some fellas are like that. He got his rag out because I sailed inside him at bowls. Just a fluke. It's like nothing. And Bloom thinks to himself, yeah, some guys are like that, but I don't think Bloom holds it against Menton at all. But Menton is a different story. And so I always took that oyster eye bit as being kind of after the fact. Bloom is noticing, yeah, he's still carrying a grudge, or I don't know.
But that annoying thing that people do. There's, if you've got I don't know, you've got a mark on your face or you've got a black eye, and somebody says to you, oh, you see, you've got a black eye, but you don't need somebody to tell you that. That's what I was thinking. There's always somebody to tell you. And I just think he kind of captured that,
Well, I will have to say that perhaps I will hold on to my opinion about the pettiness a little longer than I should, because to me, one of the endearing things, just like Bloom makes mistakes about remembering things and about facts in the world, that Bloom, for all of his vast humaneness, also has these incredibly interesting flaws. So at least in my mind, at this particular point, he's not above being petty.
But is he not a person that people don't really take seriously? You know, they sort of.
Yeah.
And so, and you know, at the end of that, he chap-fallen. He gets back a few paces. You know, so he's not really one of the boys or one of the lads.
Yeah, no, he's not. He's definitely not. He's not one of the boys.
I don't know if any of you are self-conscious, but you know, when you're self-conscious, you tend to make even more mistakes. And then you stumble, and then you're going, like, it's just totally, you make a mess of everything.
Yeah.
So I think Bloom is a little self-conscious, and then it's making it worse.
You know that word gauche? It strikes me as sort of gauche. Is that the right word?
Yeah. That's good. That's perfectly good. Yeah, he keeps on making attempts to be one of the boys, so to speak. I mean, he never totally gives up on that. And it's almost like he thinks, well, maybe this time.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go back to page 91 in Wordsworth. Had the Queen's Hotel, the father had the Queen's Hotel in Ennis. I know you mentioned it last week. How come he didn't inherit anything, or did he inherit stuff?
We're never told. We don't know. It's possible. I mean, there may have been nothing to inherit. Maybe the hotel was mortgaged, or maybe it was not doing well, or it was in debt, but his Bloom's mother was still alive, so Bloom's mother would have inherited, and maybe she settled, or who knows what happened with the hotel after the father died.
I thought the mother had already died, and that was one of the reasons why the father
You might be right.
committed suicide.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're probably right. I'm sure I'm wrong.
But did he commit suicide because he had financial problems?
Well,
We don't know.
We don't know, and that is a definite possibility. But I will say I did underline the had the hotel when we read it this time, because Bill had mentioned it earlier.
I have a question about that. Did he die in the hotel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, it was a weird use of the word had. Like he had the hotel where he killed himself, meaning that was where he killed himself. Not a sense of ownership, but a sense of, you know, I don't know how to explain it with a verb, but it just seems to me, I read it as he had that thing where he killed himself in the hotel. That's how I sort of read it.
Yeah, I see it more like he had the hotel up in Ennis, you know, that was his livelihood, that was his business. But
So,
and Lois, if it was the way you had the hotel, it's almost like he was taking revenge upon the hotel by committing suicide. You know.
Oh, really, had him like have him by the short ones.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I'm of the party that means that this means he owned the hotel in some way, although the idea that he may have been, you know, woefully in debt. And that's why, you know, the hotel went to the creditors, or, you know, was sold and all that sort of thing. That makes sense to me until I hear differently.
Yeah.
Because the next part of the conversation is them talking about Paddy Dignam, was he insured and how many children he had. And so obviously the father wasn't insured either.
Hmm.
Or maybe the only way he could pay off his debts was if they got the insurance. But I don't know if you get insurance.
You don't usually, insurance policies don't pay on a suicide. So
So he left them all high and dry.
yeah. Yeah, we don't. I don't know. We know the only possibility. Maybe there's some information in the penultimate chapter, with all of the questions and answers, because that chapter has a lot of information about various people that we've come across, and it explains a good deal. So maybe there's something in there that I just don't remember.
Hmm. See if I made any other remarks here. Oh, yeah, this is the John Henry Menton thing, right? I fell foul of him one evening. I remember it bowls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, do we have other observations? I mean, this is such a wonderful chapter that for me, it's to a certain extent, it's a little stunning. It's kind of like, the final part of Molly's soliloquy, where you don't necessarily have to discuss it in great detail. That the actual reading of it is so powerful. That it does just as well saying goodbye for today and giving ourselves digestion time.
So what are you doing for Bloomsday? Gorgonzola sandwiches in Bordeaux?
That would be nice.
Because I think the breakfast might not be so attractive.
No,
No.
definitely not. What are you doing, Orla? Are you in Dublin?
No, I'm down in Tipperary, but where I work in Dublin, I work around the corner from Sweeney, and they have a breakfast in Kennedy's with cod's roe and kidneys and, the pub Kennedy's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I was suggesting to somebody at work that maybe he was saying his son had just read Ulysses. And I was saying, well, go up to Davy Burns and maybe have gorgonzola sandwiches and
Yeah.
Bordeaux.
I thought I might go into David Burns this year. I think I had COVID last year.
Well, get there early, though. I think last year was the big anniversary year. It was really, really, you couldn't get into Davy Burns.
Were you there? You were in Dublin last year?
Last year, yeah.
He was, yeah.
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 And did you go for the breakfast in Kennedy's?
I went to the event. I didn't have the breakfast. But I was there while they were having the breakfast. There's always they had, I can't remember her name, but a friend of PJ's did a little presentation of Molly while the breakfast was going on. So
Was it Rita?
no, it wasn't Rita. I don't know who. I can't remember who it was. Some a younger actress.
Oh, right. So anyway, I'm going to something in Dalkey in the evening. I don't know what it is. Somebody's booked tickets. So,
Lovely.
Yeah.
There's a big. I read something about something going on in Dalkey.
Yeah, I don't really know. My neighbors got tickets and invited me to go.
Yeah, well, have fun.
Yeah. So.
And I know Nastasia does her play up in Blackrock. sometime in the evening. So I'm not sure when your event in Dalkey is, but you might stop and see Nastasia in Blackrock on your way up to Dalkey.
Yeah, I must have a look. It's on my phone, the information. I haven't got that far yet. I haven't got that far in the week yet.
Well, and Cork is going to have what I understand their first Bloomsday this year.
Was Robert saying that?
Robert French?
French.
Yeah, I think that he and other people, he's not the only person who's been working on that, but he's certainly part of it.
Oh, and Ilaria was planning to come, but she's not now.
Yeah, there's things going on with her mother and her cat, and
Yeah. No, I thought she was coming, but yeah, which is a bit disappointing. And there's everybody else in America. I don't really know this group that well. Emily and Katrina.
oh yeah, Katrina's in America, and
Yeah.
let's see.
Lois.
I'm in America.
Lois and Bill
York.
Kennedy. So there's half and half today.
Oh,
And
yeah.
New York does a lot of readings in various spaces on Bloomsday, and of course the pubs, some of them in New York. But
Yeah.
there are various theaters and small theater groups that will have everybody reading. We'll have Broadway stars, we'll have people from the neighborhood. You can take your choice of where you want to go.
Yeah.
Well, if there's something going on in Big Fork, Montana, I don't know what it is. But
You're
I'll
gonna have to
celebrate myself.
Take
and
him
think
up
of all-
there next year, Katrina.
Yeah, that's it.
You start the
I'll start
Montana.
it.
And Duncan, what about Texas? What's happening in Texas?
There's nothing happening in Texas, but I'm going to be part of a thing which is going to involve Roy Benjamin in New York and Jerry Fialka in California, and myself, and I think one other person. And all I'm going to do is make a presentation and share some resources for people who are just getting interested in Ulysses.
Great.
Basically just, go say, well, here, look at this web page here. This is a good resource when you want to. And I'm just going to encourage the idea that, that you really cannot get Ulysses if you're only planning to read it one time.
I know.
But the idea of reading Ulysses just once is either a very amateur notion or, but that it really is because in my mind, Ulysses is really a multi-dimensional thing, and you simply cannot get it without multiple readings.
And yeah, I mean, it was a blur to me. I nearly gave up, about even 1 and 2 readings of it. And I mean, now I sort of have a bit of an idea about it.
Yeah, well, that's the actual purpose of my presentation, which it's not going to be a grand and glorious presentation. It's going to be pretty cut and dried, so to speak. It's just to give people resources and to make them realize that the Ulysses is like learning another language. And you simply cannot expect to get everything. That you add on a little bit at a time, and you become more sensitive to the various things. And I don't know if I've told you, I came to Ulysses after 3 years of Finnegan's Wake.
Oh dear, I haven't even tried that, Duncan.
Yeah, well, what I learned from there, because I had tried Ulysses previously and only got to like page 150 and then just gave it up. But when I went back to it after 3 years of Finnegan's Wake, it was like, wow, this is pretty understandable, really.
Yeah. But I actually think that the first chapter is off-putting. I think you need to start somewhere else. That would be my advice to somebody. I don't know, all that green snot and stuff puts me off, and I think it's off-putting I think there are much more interesting chapters to start in. That'd be my advice to somebody.
Huh.
Okay, we'll get a presentation ready for next year Bloomsday.
Yeah. What chapter or what episode would you suggest to start with? Do you have one in mind?
The one in the one I love the one in the pub in the in the pub. I love that. I love that one. What one's that?
The two ladies, bronze and gold.
Oh yeah, and the the carriages going past and all of
Yes.
that's what that's I don't know what anybody else thinks. What do you think, Katrina?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. I like the first episode, but so I'm happy with it there. I mean, so I couldn't say. Anybody else have a first episode?
Calypso,
Oh,
Which one?
Calypso, yeah.
episode 4.
That's about Bloom cooking breakfast and going to the
Oh,
butcher
yeah.
shop, and Molly's
Yeah.
in bed, and
It's
that's all fun, and
it's a domestic story, and it follows normally, and it's even the thoughts and the conversation with the cat kind of thing. That to me was
Yeah.
the most reader friendly.
Yeah.
well, my major theory is that Joyce unconsciously or consciously structured his works to train readers. And so therefore, to a certain extent, and just looking at the prose, the so-called prose part, you got the Dubliners and you got Portrait of an Artist, and those are important in their own right, but they're also at each step he is trying to demonstrate, I'm a writer, and I'm a really good writer. And so, study this one, and the next one is going to be a little more difficult. But I want to prove to you at each step that I'm a smart guy and a good writer. And when I do something that's difficult, have faith that I'm doing it for a reason. And that's why I mean, the people who go into Finnegan's Wake have to have some faith that he knows what he's doing. With rare exceptions, I've met, a couple of boys and gals who read Finnegan's Wake in high school, and they said, "Oh God, it was so great. I just sat down and started reading it." But most people openly confess that they tried Finnegan's Wake, and it's just like, I couldn't get through the first page.
Yeah. I haven't tried it.
Once again, a group is really helpful.
Yeah.
And you have knowledge now of Ulysses, and I think that probably should strengthen the idea that
Maybe.
he wasn't just being crazy when he wrote Finnegan's Wake. It really was the next step for him.
Mm.
So that's my opinion.
Yeah. But just to go back, I really loved chapter 1, or the first chapter this time. I really got it.
Mhm.
So but it yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's I've heard many professors and teachers tell their students, "So just skip those first 3 things, just get right to the story." But that I think that's not just a cop out. I think it's obviously it's not the way Joyce wrote the novel,
Mhm.
and you miss so much. I think the key, obviously, to me, is just to keep reading the book, to read it more than twice or 3 or 4 or 6 times,
Hmm.
and then begin to see the relationships between sections, and then the relationships. If you keep reading Joyce in general, you see the correlations to his other work in this book. So I always tell people, just it's not like some people think it's like the I Ching, you can pick up any chapter and start anywhere and get something out of it. And maybe that's true. I mean, there's something there, but I think you miss the whole when you start focusing too much on the parts, and you need to really take it as a whole, get through it, and then get through it again and again and again and again.
That's why I'm a multi-time reader, that,
Mhm.
Mm.
that, and I think it's good for people to be told in the beginning that, you're only, at best, you're only going to get a little slice of this thing the first time.
Mm.
It's not, there might be some exceptions, perhaps people who have a really strong background and lots of reading, lots of literature. But, at least in my case, the multi-readings have been extremely important, and I have full faith that with each reading that I do going forward, it will be even richer and richer.
Mhm.
And whether I keep reading at the pace that I'm reading now, I read, see, 1, 2, 3. If you throw in the foreign language groups, I'm reading in 4 or 5 different groups. So whether that keeps up over the years, I don't know, but I know that reading it at least once a year is going to continue to go on. It's just too rich. It's almost like a religious service for me at this point.
I feel a bit like that, although but it's one of the few positive things that has come out of COVID.
Mhm.
I was just totally isolated. It kept me sane, pretending that, but I was almost pretending that I was with people.
Yeah.
And because
I'm still pretending that, Sylvia.
Yeah, but you're with people, but you're with people in a different way.
well, it was allowed, Orla, by what do you call our teacher?
PJ.
DJ.
Oh no! I was thinking about when we weren't allowed 2 kilometers.
Oh, a Varadkar.
Yeah, I couldn't remember his name.
Yeah, well, I spit when I say it, but that's another story.
Anyway, so
I'm having lots of conversations ongoing. I mean, don't knock online as I know it's virtual and it's fantastic. It's really opened up so much for all of us.
Yes.
And I mean, I wouldn't have bothered to do either Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses unless I had this option.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, going into Sweeney, you run going into Sweeney. If you were going 5 nights into Sweeney, you'd be a total alcoholic.
Yeah.
Or you already were, and you knew you get something to drink.
Yeah. Well, Sweeney's did the state some service. And Charles Haughey said that when he got thrown out of government. At least I did state some service. I'm reading Othello, so at the minute for something that I'm doing. So anyway, I think I'd better go.
Okay, well, thank you for coming back after Florence.
Yeah.
And I will tell you once again, I think that we've got a really good, fun group of readers that are quite sincere in their approach to Ulysses. And I look forward to every week. So
Yeah.
on
Me
we
too.
go. So
Me too.
whatever you do, even if you don't do anything tomorrow, have a good Bloomsday anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.